Empress Dowager Cixi was a member of the Manchu Yehe Nara clan. She had been brought to the Forbidden City at the age of just 16 as a concubine for Emperor Xianfeng. At court, her title was Imperial Consort Gui. Following Emperor Xianfeng's death and the accession of his son Zaichu into the throne as Emperor Tongzhi, she was granted the title of Empress Dowager Cixi. Since the new emperor was still only a boy, Cixi, who was 27 at the time, ruled as joint regent with Empress Dowager Zi'an. For several years, the two women held court from behind a screen. Gradually, though, Empress Dowager Cixi asserted her authority, and as her power grew, so did the length of her title. Eventually, she was known as Holy Empress Dowager of Benevolence, Happiness, Solemnity, Good Health, Compatibility, Harmony, Brilliance, Gentleness, Longevity, Honesty, Dignity, and Devotion. Empress Dowager Cixi was used to having everything she wanted. Only one thing was denied her: the chance to celebrate her birthday in style at the Summer Palace. But finally, at the age of 63, and after a wait of 3 years, her dream came true, and she could revel in her power and glory in a way no other woman in Chinese history had been able to. Among the countless gifts presented to Empress Dowager Cixi on her birthday, there was a very special one that she kept in her sleeping quarters in Le Shou Hall. It was an embroidered screen called Birds Paying Homage to the Phoenix. In Chinese mythology, the phoenix was the ruler of the birds, and all the other birds, no matter how beautiful they were, had to wait on the phoenix. This screen was a particular favorite of Empress Dowager Cixi's because the phoenix symbolized a powerful woman. Emperor Guangxu marked his birthday in the Summer Palace on a number of occasions, but not one of his celebrations was on such a grand scale as that held for Empress Dowager Cixi.
我们现在看到的地方呢是听力馆。 院内有正殿、配殿、旁院和一个2层的戏楼。乾隆皇帝的时候啊，他就经常侍奉着皇太后呢，在这里看戏。而慈禧和光绪呢，都是大戏迷，这里呢也经常的为他们表演着京剧。
Tingley Garden, the garden for listening to orioles, is located on the western side of Longevity Hill. In front of it is Qingyao Pavilion, which is part of the western section of the Long Corridor. An inscription above the front gate of Tingley Garden, written in the calligraphic style of Empress Dowager Cixi, reads, "Golden twigs of exquisite beauty." The quotation is from the history of the Han Dynasty, and it refers to the colourful tassels that decorated musical instruments at that time. Empress Dowager Cixi was often entertained in this garden by a large orchestra playing exotic instruments. During the reign of Emperor Qianlong, the theatre faced south towards Lake Kunming. The reason was that the emperor often performed on the stage to entertain his mother, and traditional etiquette dictated that the most important guest should face south. However, Empress Dowager Cixi and Emperor Guangxu never performed, so the stage faced to the north, while the audience faced south towards Longevity Hill. Empress Dowager Cixi was so passionate about Peking opera that she had a second theatre built, this one inside Dehe Garden. She liked to reward court officials with an invitation to a performance here. But to those who had no interest in Peking opera, attending was a hardship. To make matters worse, there were no toilets in Dehe Garden, and the gates were kept tightly closed. So an unfortunate official who needed to relieve himself would have to bribe the eunuchs to lend him a ladder. Then he would climb over the wall and relieve himself on the other side. After the theatre was completed in Dehe Garden, Tingli Garden became Empress Dowager Cixi's favourite place for resting in the summer. There was a wharf at the front of Tingli Garden, from where she would embark on a boat to enjoy the beautiful scenery around Lake Kunming. On Zhongyuan Festival, the 15th day of the 7th lunar month, Empress Dowager Cixi would be taken to a high vantage point from where she could watch the flickering candles on paper lotus flowers floating on Lake Kunming. During Mid-Autumn Festival on the 15th day of the 8th lunar month, she would board the marble boats or go to Jingfu Pavilion on the east side of Longevity Hill to gaze at the full moon with a glass of wine in her hand. Empress Dowager Cixi spent a lot of her time painting. She would often present her paintings to the princes and court ministers as gifts, but she was well aware that she was not a particularly skilled artist, so she sometimes added her personal seal to works by the court painter Miao Jiahui. She then presented them as if they were her own work. The recipients, although almost certainly aware of the deception, had little choice but to express their admiration for the paintings. People in the upper strata of Qing Dynasty society, however, regarded owning a painting that bore the signature of Empress Dowager Cixi as a great honour. Some of the princes and ministers at court spent a lot of time trying to tell if a painting bearing the signature of Empress Dowager Cixi was really by her or not. One indicator was if the twigs of a plum blossom crossed each other to form a rhombus. If they did, this meant that the painting was the Empress Dowager's work, as a professional artist would not make such a mistake. Naturally, no one dared to inform Empress Dowager Cixi of her error. Even the emperor had to watch his step with Empress Dowager Cixi. After ascending the throne, Emperor Guangxu was obliged to present all official reports to Empress Dowager Cixi for her approval. Yet superficially, it seemed that the two got along quite well. Empress Dowager Cixi felt far more relaxed and much happier in the Summer Palace than she did in the Forbidden City. The Imperial Garden acted almost like a barometer of the political situation in China. Whenever Empress Dowager Cixi was not in the garden, or she had to leave it to attend to state affairs, it meant that something of critical national importance had occurred. When two German missionaries were killed in Shandong province at the end of 1897, Germany used the incident as an excuse for sending warships into Jiaozhou Bay. Before long, Russia had occupied the two cities of Lushun and Dalian in the northeast. French warships had entered Guangzhou Bay, and British forces were in the city of Weihai in Shandong province. The British also demanded more territory in Kowloon. Western powers were moving to divide China's territory. In 1898, the Forbidden City was the scene of a significant event that would have widespread repercussions. Emperor Guangxu, in 10 years on the throne, had accomplished virtually nothing. However, he had assimilated a number of Western ideas, and he had been working with a group of scholars on a plan for political reforms. The plan won tacit consent from Empress Dowager Cixi. Between April and September 1898, Emperor Guangxu made 19 trips from the Forbidden City to the Summer Palace to inform the Empress Dowager of developments. On each of these occasions, the emperor was obliged to kneel outside the door of Cixi's room while he waited for her to summon him inside. Sometimes, the Empress Dowager delayed giving her permission because, it is said, she liked to see the expression on the emperor's face as he waited on his knees. On June the 11th, 1898, Emperor Guangxu issued a decree announcing the introduction of the reforms. The key points were reform of the structure of the government, the development of industry and commerce, the abolition of the imperial examination system, the establishment of new-style schools, the founding of newspapers, and the acknowledgement of the right to free speech. A contemporary account describes the meeting between Emperor Guangxu and Empress Dowager Cixi, at which he explained the reforms. Empress Dowager Cixi reclined on her bed, listening and making comments. She was in a happy mood. The emperor proposed that a bulletin detailing the main content of the reforms be printed and distributed among the senior court officials. The Empress Dowager nodded to indicate her approval. Within a period of 103 days, Emperor Guangxu issued no fewer than 180 imperial edicts. But in doing so, he revealed that he had failed to create any sense of priority in implementing the reforms, even though they would affect all aspects of society and the interests of vast sections of the population. Inevitably, resistance to the reforms began to grow. The opposition factions directed their criticism at Empress Dowager Cixi, and eventually the reforms became the focus of a struggle between the Empress Dowager and the Emperor. In the morning of September the 19th, 1898, Empress Dowager Cixi set out in a hurry from the Summer Palace for the Forbidden City. 2 days later, she announced that Emperor Guangxu had been placed under house arrest and that she had assumed control of court affairs. The advocates of reform were either imprisoned or executed. A few of them fled abroad. Today, this episode is known as the Reform Movement of 1898, or the 100 Days Reform. The Empress Dowager, informing the Emperor of his arrest, is said to have angrily accused him of betraying her. Throughout 1899, the Summer Palace was strangely quiet. Empress Dowager Cixi was kept busy dealing with state affairs at the Forbidden City and had no time to visit the Imperial Garden. Eventually, she returned to the Summer Palace in the spring of 1900. In earlier times, Renshou Hall had been known as Qinjiang Hall, the Hall of Diligent Government. The name was given by Emperor Qianlong, who was anxious to show that he was not neglecting state affairs when he was in this garden. Empress Dowager Cixi changed the name to Renshou, meaning Hall of Benevolence and Longevity. It's a reference to a line in the Analects of Confucius which reads, "Wise people are happy and kind people live long." Renshou Hall, with its subsidiary buildings to the north and south and the minister's room outside its gate, formed the centre of state administration at the Summer Palace. It was here that Emperor Guangxu, when he was staying at the Summer Palace, dealt with state affairs. But in the minds of people today, it is dominated by Empress Dowager Cixi. Two groups of sculptures stand on the north and south sides outside Renshou Hall. Each group consists of two brass dragons and a brass phoenix. The dragon and phoenix are highly auspicious creatures in China. On the base of the phoenix are the words, "Heaven and earth exist in harmony." So she had these words inscribed there in memory of her late husband, Emperor Xianfeng. The brass dragons that flank the two phoenixes are rather more unassuming in their demeanour. While the phoenix is holding its head high, the dragons are bowed. The design of the phoenixes and dragons was evidently meant to please Empress Dowager Cixi. A large rock from Lake Taihu, originally in the garden of the Prince of Rui, now the Peony Garden at Peking University, was moved into the Summer Palace. To landscaping artists, this is known as a blocking the scene rock. Resembling an old man bowing with his hands clasped, the rock served as a screen. Empress Dowager Cixi was particularly fond of this rock. The Chinese character for longevity in the name of Renshou Hall was written in the Empress Dowager's own handwriting. A glass screen behind the throne is inscribed with 226 longevity characters. Each of the 226 characters is in a different writing style. No two are the same. It was the idea of the Empress Dowager herself to have the screen placed here. Emperor Guangxu occupied the throne alone for just 10 years of his 34-year reign. The only thing of significance he achieved in those 10 years was to devise his reforms, but these ultimately failed. On June 16, 1898, 6 days after the launch of the reform movement, Emperor Guangxu held a conversation with Kang Youwei at Renshou Hall. It lasted for more than 2 hours. It was the only ever meeting between the emperor, who was 27 at the time, and the 40-year-old reformer. Just 3 months later, the emperor was removed from the throne. This photograph, taken in 1900, shows Empress Dowager Cixi on her way one morning to hold court at Renshou Hall. She's flanked by the chief eunuchs Li Lianying and Cui Yugui, and she's accompanied by a huge entourage of other eunuchs and palace maids. Empress Dowager Cixi sat on the throne in Renshou Hall while Emperor Guangxu, who was by now under house arrest, occupied a seat to the side. Sometimes the Empress Dowager would ask the Emperor for comments, and the Emperor would meekly answer. But his voice was so low that even the court ministers kneeling near the throne could not hear him. But they knew that the Emperor always concurred with the Empress Dowager's views. From 1900 onwards, whenever Empress Dowager Cixi was staying at the Summer Palace, the sound of a drum could be heard coming from Yulan Hall. This was the place where the Emperor was forced to stay. Playing the drum was his way of keeping himself entertained. Yulan Hall is an exquisite building that stands on the south side of Renshou Hall, near the shore of Lake Kunming. It had once been the private office of Emperor Qianlong and Emperor Jiaqing. A corridor connects Yulan Hall with its side halls. The western side hall, named Ouxiang House, faces the lake and offers a pleasant view of the lotus flowers on the water. A path leads from Oxiang House to Leshou Hall, and another path leads from the eastern side hall named Xiafen Chamber to Renshou Hall. On September the 16th, 1898, on the eve of the collapse of the reform movement, Emperor Guangxu granted an audience to Yuan Shikai, who was then Commissioner of Justice in Zhili province. The emperor wanted Yuan Shikai's support for his reforms, and he offered him the post of alternate minister. In reality, however, Yuan was a staunch supporter of Empress Dowager Cixi. Emperor Guangxu's main place of imprisonment in the wake of the failure of the reform movement was Yingcai Island in Lake Zhongnanhai in Peking. But whenever Empress Dowager Cixi visited the summer palace, she would bring the emperor with her. There, he would be confined to Yulan Hall. The Empress Dowager had high walls built alongside Yulan Hall to block the east and west exits and cut the path to Yiyuan Hall in the north, where Empress Longyu stayed. Emperor Guangxu was not even allowed to visit his empress. Depressed and bored, Emperor Guangxu would spend a lot of time in the courtyard of Yulan Hall beating a small drum. And apart from a small group of eunuchs who waited on him, his only company was a few rabbits. Emperor Guangxu had long suffered a number of illnesses, and his health deteriorated further as a result of the depression brought on by the failure of his reforms. The prospect of meeting with Empress Dowager Cixi would only increase his stress. For her part, the Empress Dowager ordered the best doctor at court to tend the emperor. She also announced to the country that the emperor was in poor health. The study in Yulan Hall was filled with books about the history and politics of Western countries. It's known that Emperor Guangxu studied English for a time. Clearly, he harbored some hope for the future.